Eli Turner first heard the thing outside his house on a Tuesday in late November, when the first real cold came crawling down from Canada and laid itself over the woods like a sheet over a corpse. He lived alone at the edge of Black Pine, Maine, in a rental cabin with crooked window frames and a furnace that coughed more than it heated. The landlord called it rustic. Eli called it cheap. It sat half a mile off Route 9 at the end of a muddy logging road, with spruce trees crowded so close around it that on windy nights their branches scraped the roof like fingernails. He had come to Black Pine because there was nowhere else to go. That was the story he told the locals anyway. Told it to the woman at the gas station with the smoker's cough, told it to the old men in plaid at Denny's Market, told it to the bartender at the Moose Horn Tavern who wiped the same glass for 20 straight minutes and never once looked him in the eye. Fresh start, remote work, needed quiet. That last part was true. Quiet was what he wanted. Quiet enough that he wouldn't hear his son calling for him from the backseat. Quiet enough that he wouldn't keep seeing the crushed guardrail and the black water below it and the shape of Teddy's red mitten floating like a wound on the river. The state trooper had said it wasn't his fault. Black ice, no guard lights, the bridge should have been closed. But there are things the law forgives that your own mind never does. So Eli came north and took his grief into the woods because he thought loneliness might be easier if he chose it. Then on that Tuesday night, something circled the cabin. At first he told himself it was a deer. There were plenty of them out here. They came right up to the tree line at dusk, pale and vaporous in the headlights, their eyes shining with that blank coin brightness animals have. Sometimes he saw tracks near the porch in the mornings. But deer did not move like that. This was heavier, slower. Deliberate. He sat up in bed, listening. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Not 4 legs, 2. Or maybe 4 trying to sound like 2. The sound went around the cabin once, then stopped beneath the bedroom window. Eli held his breath so long his chest hurt. The window was old glass thin enough to warp the moonlight. He could see only a wash of white and the vague black comb of trees beyond. Nothing moved, nothing at all. Then came a sound that made every hair on his arms stand up. A child's voice. Daddy. It was faint, hoarse, as if spoken through a mouth full of mud. His heart gave one huge, sick lurch. He was out of bed before he knew he'd moved. He crossed the room in 3 steps and stood frozen by the window, one hand pressed to the sill, the other over his mouth. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Then again. Daddy, I'm cold. It sounded like Teddy. Not exactly, not if you were listening with the sane part of your mind. There was something wrong in it, some wet dragging note like a cassette tape chewed up in a player. But grief doesn't listen with the sane part. Grief is a ventriloquist. It throws the voice you most want to hear right into the dark and makes you believe. Eli reached for the curtain and stopped. Some old instinct, older than language, older than reason, tightened through him like a wire. Don't look. The thought came clear as speech. Don't open it, don't let it know you hear. He stood there shaking, hand inches from the fabric, while outside the voice began to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, small, miserable sobs. A child in the cold. A child alone. By morning there were tracks in the snowless dirt around the cabin. Eli stared at them from the porch with a mug of coffee cooling in his hands. They looked almost human. Almost. There was a heel and arch, something like long toes, but too long and tipped with puncture marks where claws or nails had bitten into the mud. The stride was wrong too wide, too deep. Whatever had made them was tall, very tall, and it had walked all the way around the house before stopping beneath his bedroom window. The tracks ended there. Not turned away. Ended. As if the thing had simply risen into the air. At Denny's Market he asked the owner, Nora Bell, if there were any large animals in the woods besides deer and bear. Nora was in her 60s, broad-shouldered, gray braid hanging over one flannel shoulder. She had the sort of face New England winters make, lined, red at the cheeks, built to endure. She looked at him for a long second without smiling. You hear something last night? She asked. Eli tried to laugh it off. Maybe, probably a coyote. Coyotes don't knock. He felt his throat go dry. I didn't say it knocked. Nora leaned both palms on the counter. Her wedding ring had worn a permanent groove into the flesh. Then I'll tell you something for free. If you hear anyone outside after dark, you don't answer. If it sounds hurt, you don't answer. If it sounds like somebody you love, you sure as hell don't answer." The bell over the door jangled as someone came in, bringing a gush of cold air and the smell of gasoline. Nora didn't look away from Eli. "People around here used to know that," she said softly. "Now they move up from away and think every old story's a joke." "What story?" She glanced toward the back room where a radio mumbled static and weather, the kind that stays a story if you keep your door shut. That night he locked every window, checked the deadbolt 3 times, and dragged the kitchen table in front of the front door, which was stupid but made him feel slightly less helpless. At 9:30 the power went out. The cabin gave a little shudder like it had exhaled. The fridge died, the heater cut off. Every room dropped into a dark so complete it seemed poured rather than fallen. Eli stood in the kitchen holding his phone, the flashlight beam wavering across peeling linoleum and a sink full of dishes. Outside, the woods had gone silent. Not quiet, silent. No branches rubbing, no wind, no night birds, no distant engine on the highway. Just absent. Then 3 knocks came at the front door. Slow, hollow, knock, knock, knock. He backed away so fast he hit the counter. The voice that came next belonged to his ex-wife, Mara. "Eli." He actually whimpered. He would deny that to the grave, but it happened. The sound came up from his gut like something being stepped on. Mara was in Vermont, Mara who would never forgive him. Mara who had looked at him across the funeral home carpet with eyes emptied out so thoroughly they seemed blind. "Eli, please," the voice said, "I know you're in there." Then, after a pause, "It's Teddy." He stumbled backward into the hall. His phone shook in his hand. He almost called 911, almost called Nora, almost did anything a rational man might do. Instead, he stood in the dark, listening to that thing outside speak in stolen voices. Mara, then Teddy, then his own mother, dead 12 years. Then a wet, rasping imitation of his own voice saying, "Let me in." The thing at the door began to laugh. There is a kind of fear that sends you running and another that nails you where you stand. This was the second kind. Eli felt his body turn foreign around him, his fingers numb, his jaw locked, his bladder threatening to let go like a terrified child. The laughter stopped. A smell came under the door. Rot meat gone sweet, first soaked in swamp water, the rank iron stink of old blood. Something long and hard dragged once down the wood on the other side. Then the knocking started again, louder now, not knuckles this time. Bone. 3 days later, a man named Henry Walsh went missing. Henry was a snowplow driver who lived in a sagging ranch house with 2 hounds and a wife everyone called Ginny. He'd gone out before dawn to salt a private road on the north side of town and never come back. They found the truck half in a ditch, engine running, driver's side door hanging open. There was blood on the step rail and on the seat, but not enough to tell a clean story. The dogs they brought in to track him pulled hard into the trees, then tucked tail and had to be dragged back. At the Moose Horn that evening, everybody talked too loudly and drank too fast. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking, so they said other things around it. Bear attack, drug deal, maybe he ran off. Eli sat at the far end of the bar with a whiskey he wasn't tasting and listened to the lies collect like dirty snow. An old man named Cal Murchison finally turned on his stool and looked straight at him. Cal was all angles and parchment skin, with nicotine fingers and eyes the pale blue of old ice. He had the unsettling stillness of someone who had been sitting in the same dark thoughts for many years. "It's got your scent now," he said. Conversation nearby stuttered and dipped. Eli stared at him. "What?" "You heard it, that's enough. Here's you hearing it, and that opens the road." The bartender hissed, "Cal." But the old man kept going. "In the Penobscot stories it comes starving. In the settler stories it comes when there's a hunger in a man big enough to crawl into. Grief works fine, guilt works even better." He sipped his beer. "It likes the ones already hollowed out." Eli stood up so fast his stool tipped over. "Don't talk to me like you know anything about me." Cal's face didn't change. "I know it called you by a dead voice because they always do. And I know if you follow it into the trees, they'll never find enough of you to fill a lunch pail." Eli left with half the bar watching him. Outside, the cold slapped tears into his eyes. He stood by his truck breathing steam and trying not to shake. Anger was easier than terror, so he clung to it. Superstitious lunatics, he thought. Backwoods garbage. He was halfway through convincing himself when he noticed something tucked under his wiper blade. A red mitten. Child-sized knit wool, dark and stiff at one cuff as if soaked and dried. Teddy had owned one exactly like it. He made a sound no human throat should be able to produce. The woods across the road stood black and patient beneath the moon. Something moved between the trunks. Too tall, head brushing the lower branches. Watching. The next morning he drove to Nora's and showed her the mitten. She didn't ask where he'd gotten it. That told him more than any answer could have. Instead, she took it in both hands like it was something holy and terrible, then wrapped it in a dish rag and put it in a drawer under the register. "You don't keep gifts from a thing like that," she said. "What is it?" Nora looked toward the windows, though the parking lot outside held only 2 pickups and a drift of dead leaves chasing themselves in circles. The old people had names, the church had different names, my grandmother just called it the Hungry Man. She rubbed her wrists as if cold. But names don't matter much, rules matter. Tell me. Don't answer voices from the dark, don't follow tracks that appear and disappear, don't eat anything you find left on your porch, don't invite it, don't curse it, and if you see it with your own eyes. She broke off. If I see it, pray it kills you quick. That should have been the moment he packed up, drove south, got a hotel room under bright highway lights, and never came back. But fear is a strange carpenter. It doesn't always build escape routes. Sometimes it boards them shut. Because part of Eli, some broken, shameful, yearning part, still thought about Teddy's voice in the dark. Not the wrongness in it. Not the rut. Just the voice. There are griefs that become addictions. You learn to hate the craving and feed it anyway. The storm came in on Friday. By dusk, the sky was the color of dirty wool and snow was falling thick enough to erase the trees 10 yards out. The cabin windows went white one by one. The world narrowed to the walls around him and the furnace thumping in the crawlspace. At 7, he heard footsteps on the porch. No circling this time, no teasing. A direct approach. The boards creaked under the weight. Then a small hand patted the door. Daddy. Eli sat at the kitchen table with Nora's shotgun across his knees. She had driven out that afternoon and brought it herself, along with a box of shells and a face like carved oak. Won't kill it, she had said, but loud sometimes counts for something. Now he stared at the door while his pulse battered his vision. Daddy, please. A pause. I can't feel my feet. He began to cry. Not because he believed, not exactly, but because some animal part of his soul could not bear not to. The voice went on, patient as dripping water. Why didn't you save me? He put both hands over his ears. The knocks became pounding, the whole frame shook, dust sifted down from the jamb, something heavy slammed once, twice, 3 times. Then silence, real silence. Eli lowered his hands. From the back of the cabin came the sound of a window sliding open. He spun around. Had he locked them all? He thought so, he thought he had. A wet footstep sounded in the hall. Then another. The smell hit first, rolling through the house in a wave so foul it made him gag. He raised the shotgun and stood. The hallway was black except for the weak spill from his lantern on the kitchen counter. That glow reached just far enough to show the wallpaper, the narrow runner rug, the open mouth of the bathroom door. A shape moved there. It unfolded itself into the light inch by inch, like something emerging from deep water. At first, Eli thought it wore a deer skull. That was the way people drew these things online, in tattoos and bad horror movies, antlers and bones and spooky nonsense. The truth was worse. It had a face that looked almost human stretched over the memory of a stag. The jaw was too long, full of black gums and thin yellow teeth like broken piano keys. Its skin clung tight to the bones beneath, gray in some places, leathery brown in others, with patches of coarse winter-white hair hanging from it in strips. The eyes were sunken and lambent, reflecting the lantern with a sick cellar light. Its arms hung down nearly to its knees, ending in hands too large for the body, each finger jointed wrong and tipped with dark hooked nails. But the worst thing was not its face. The worst thing was the look of famine in it. Not simple hunger, not animal need. An emptiness so vast it seemed to bend the room around it, a want that had gone on so long it had become holiness. It cocked its head, and when it spoke, Teddy's voice came from that ruin of a mouth. "Daddy, Eli fired." The blast deafened him and lit the hall in a white bloom. The creature jerked sideways, a spray of black matter striking the wallpaper. For one blessed instant he thought, "I heard it." Then it smiled. Its jaw split wider than any jaw could. Not unhinged split, the flesh at the corners tore open with a wet ripping sound, exposing more teeth beneath the first row, small and needle-thin. It came down the hall in 2 bounding steps that were somehow both graceful and malformed, like a spider trying to imitate a man. Eli fired again. The thing hit him before the recoil settled. They crashed into the kitchen table, the lantern shattered, darkness poured over them. Claws raked across his shoulder, pain burst white-hot down his arm. He screamed and shoved, feeling hide, bone, wet fur, and impossible strength. Its breath washed over his face in gusts of carrion stink. Then through the black, a new sound split the room. Nora shouting. Another shotgun blast. The creature shrieked. That sound would live in Eli's head until death. Not animal, not human, but something between a woman screaming and a tree splitting under lightning. He rolled clear as the thing thrashed across the floor. Nora fired again from the doorway, silhouetted by stormlight braid whipping in the wind. Cal Murchison stood behind her holding a road flare that painted the room red as an open wound. "Fire," he bellowed. "It hates fire." The creature lunged toward the back hall. Nora's third shot took part of its shoulder away, but it still moved with horrible speed. The flare struck it just before it reached the broken window. For an instant, everything froze. The thing reared up, towering flames licking across its chest and neck. In that red light, Eli saw something impossible in its face. Not rage, recognition, as if it knew him, as if it had been walking toward him for years. Then it hurled itself through the window and vanished into the storm. They found blood in the snow the next morning, black and oily and smoking faintly where it had splashed. The trail led into the trees and stopped at a frozen creek bed. Stopped, just like the prints under Eli's window. Nora wanted to burn the cabin. Cal wanted Eli out of town before sunset. Eli wanted to leave, and yet when he packed the truck his hands kept slowing over certain things. Teddy's old photo folded in a book, a toy car in the glove compartment, a hospital bracelet he'd never thrown away. Cal watched him from the porch, cigarette burning down between 2 fingers. "It may follow," the old man said. "Can it?" Cal exhaled smoke into the white air. "Some things you meet in the woods stay in the woods. Some find out there's better eating elsewhere." Eli looked at the tree line. In daylight it seemed ordinary again. Spruce, birch, snow caught in the branches, a place you could hike with a thermos and come back with rosy cheeks. But places aren't what they seem, not always, sometimes they are mouths. "What does it want from me?" Eli asked. Cal's expression turned old in a whole new way. "You know." And Eli did. Not his flesh, not really. It could have taken that already. What it wanted was the part of him that still opened when Teddy called. The part that would always open. That winter he moved south to Portland, then farther still. Apartments with neighbors close by, streetlights, sirens, human sounds. He never stayed anywhere rural, never went camping, never drove back roads at night. For a while he almost believed distance mattered. Then 3 months later, during a sleet storm in Massachusetts, he heard scratching outside his 3rd-floor apartment window. Not possible, of course, but he heard it. Scratch, scratch, scratch. He sat in his kitchen staring at the glass while every bit of blood drained out of him. Then came the voice, muffled by sleet and height and all the laws of God's earth it should not have been able to cross. Small, trembling, beloved. Daddy. Eli closed his eyes. The tears came at once. Outside, something patient waited in the dark, carrying its hunger from forest to town to city, wearing love like a trap. And because the worst truths are the simplest, he understood at last that it had never really lived in the Maine woods. That was only where it found him. The real wilderness was inside him, cold and trackless and full of voices that would never stop calling. Outside the window, Teddy began to cry. And after a long, long time, Eli rose from his chair and walked toward the sound.